This is the CBS Evening News. Bob Schieffer reporting. Good evening. More trouble in Afghanistan today. Rebel rockets fell in parts of the capital, and rebel leaders claim that Soviet planes bombed villages to clear the way for the pullout of the Red Army. Under a UN plan, the Soviets have until the middle of next month to complete their withdrawal, but it now appears they will be out within a week. Anthony Mason is in London and has our report.
As the British prepared to close their embassy in Kabul this morning, Afghan workers were installing barbed wire on the walls around the British compound. It's a measure of the uneasiness in Kabul that even the Iranian embassy today ordered steel sheets to be welded to its gates. With the Soviets pulling out, diplomats do not so much fear attacks from the rebels as they do chaos in the streets, the kind that occurred this week when Afghan soldiers tried to distribute scarce sacks of flour to some factory workers. Food shortages in the capital have reportedly eased somewhat since a Soviet airlift began last week. The Mujahideen rebels have promised to halt attacks on Soviet relief convoys and are now sending in their own truckloads of wheat and flour from the Pakistan border. Food has suddenly become a political weapon. The Marxist government insists it will ultimately triumph, and Soviet Defense Minister Dmitry Yatsov is in Kabul this weekend to show solidarity with President Najibullah. The Soviets have left behind more than enough firepower for the Afghan army to hold off the rebels, but many question whether the young conscripts are committed enough to use it. But the rebels also have divisions in their ranks. Only a fragile alliance binds the 7 factions. But Mujahideen leaders remind those who fear that they're too divided to run a country that no one believed they could fight a war.
If we, people who don't know, never take a gun before, in one time took a gun in a fight and defeated the enemy, if one time we took a pen, we were going to run the government too.
The Soviets, whose hearts long ago went out of this war, now seem in a hurry to leave.
They were not defeated militarily, but they certainly failed in their objective of establishing a communist regime in Afghanistan. And in that sense, their experience in Afghanistan is a big failure with great significance historically.
Inside the large U.S. compound in Kabul, only 11 diplomats remain, and they're expected to leave by Thursday. The Japanese, British, and French will all be leaving ahead of the Soviets too, but some are going reluctantly. Said a French diplomat, "I'm sorry we have to pull down our flag when Afghanistan needs the help of the entire world." Anthony Mason, CBS News, London.
Iranian Foreign Minister Velayati arrived today in Damascus trying to end the battle between rival Shiite Muslim groups in Beirut, commenting on reports that efforts to free Western hostages are making progress. Velayati would only say he hopes they will all be released soon. With unprecedented talks between Solidarity and the communist government now set for early next month, Lech Wałęsa today called the dialogue a chance to write a new chapter in Polish history. Bert Quint now with that story.
There was a keen sense of irony in Poland today. On the day the state buried Józef Cyrankiewicz, a former prime minister and one of the founders of Polish state socialism, Lech Wałęsa, symbol of opposition to one-party rule, was permitted to use a Warsaw University auditorium to make an historic announcement. He said talks between the government and Solidarity finally will begin a week from Monday. Wałęsa will sit at this table with his old communist enemies to discuss ways of setting the economy right and to negotiate Solidarity's demand it be allowed to resume its role as the first legal, independent trade union in the East Bloc.
The talks could last 6 weeks, and there's no guarantee they'll end in agreement. Solidarity's stand is no legal recognition, no cooperation, and that issue is far from settled.
But Wałęsa agrees with Prime Minister Rakowski on one point. The regime and Solidarity are in the same boat. And to keep that boat from sinking, they have to bail water together. Solidarity has proved it has a flair for manning the barricades, but it has no experience in the free enterprise today's communists admit is needed to save Poland's economy. Economic reform means modernizing or eliminating outmoded heavy industry, plants closed, jobs lost. And for the youth of this country, paying the price for 40 years of socialist mismanagement, it means even greater hardship. Wałęsa admits he has no magic formula for them. That, he says, is Poland's and my own personal tragedy. Bert Quint, CBS News, Warsaw.
The official Cuban news agency reported today that Soviet leader Gorbachev will make his once-postponed visit to Cuba the first week in April. Many of the key players in the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis met again today at a conference in Moscow. The conference is a reminder of just how close that the world came to its first nuclear war and how easily that point could be reached again. Barry Peterson has our report.
They were eye to eye again this weekend, many of the men who brought the world to the nuclear brink and helped it ease back. Andrei Gromyko, then foreign minister of the Soviet Union, former defense secretary Robert McNamara, and top Cuban officials who have never joined previous such conferences and who ended up offering to host another one.
I think from the Cuban perspective, they feel they need to get over the hump of the Cuban Missile Crisis before they can begin to have normal relations with the United States.
During the conference, some realized that, as bad as it seemed at the time, knowing now what happened behind the scenes makes those days even more frightening.
It's clear today that there was very real danger, that events could have spun out of control.
The Americans brought along 15,000 documents, some recently declassified. Among them, an American plan proposing an invasion of Cuba for October 1962. Proof, say some, that the Soviets and Cubans were in fact honest when they said the missiles were deployed out of fear over an American attack.
If I'd been a Cuban or a Soviet, I would have seen considerable evidence of a plan by the U.S. or an intent by the U.S. to invade. The second point is I can state without any qualification whatsoever, there was absolutely no intent.
It was also a chance for old enemies to make friends. And after the conference ended this afternoon, a chance to reflect on how close nuclear war had really been.
Organizers say one of the most important lessons may be seeing how the other side made its decisions and made its mistakes. One hope from reliving this almost 30-year-old crisis is that those in command now may learn how not to make those same mistakes, how not to take the world to that same brink. Barry Peterson, CBS News, Moscow.
And still ahead on the CBS Evening News, a fresh face amid the new breezes of Washington, and later Madison Avenue going 8 over opera.
Pepperidge Farms.
Spokesman insisted today that a controversial plan to impose a tax on bank and S&L deposits is still under consideration. He denied reports that the White House has told the savings industry that the proposal is dead. Meeting with the president today was Henry Kissinger, just back from talks with Mikhail Gorbachev. The former Secretary of State said that Gorbachev is not pushing for a quick summit and understands Mr. Bush wants a fresh review of U.S.-Soviet policy. Afterward, the president left the White House for lunch at a club a few blocks away. About 50 businessmen belong to the club. Mr. Bush has often dropped by in the past. One unexpected development at the White House this week, it turns out the president's war on drugs will not be fought exactly the way many Americans had anticipated. We have more on that now from White House correspondent Wyatt Andrews.
It was among the clearest campaign promises from then-candidate George Bush. If he were president, there would be a war on drugs. Then, as president, he confirmed that promise.
Take my word for it, this scourge will stop.
But this week, the president's ideas for what his war on drugs will mean seemed somewhat underwhelming. First, the White House admitted the man picked as drug czar, former Education Secretary William Bennett, would not be part of regular cabinet meetings, despite holding cabinet rank. Then the president told reporters the war on drugs would emphasize drug education. In the inner cities of America, where thousands are on waiting lists to get into drug treatment centers, the question is, what kind of drug war is that?
Just trying to educate ourselves out of this crisis is not going to happen. A Jamaican gang is not going to respond to education.
White House aides explained the drug education policy as one partially based on the personality of William Bennett. As Education Secretary, Bennett made bold headlines explaining what schools were not teaching and highlighting what Americans didn't know. We want Bennett to give the same visibility to the drug problem, a White House aide said, that he gave to education. There were voices of support for the president's idea.
It's something that we must look at a generation ahead. And the best way to get out of a problem that is as pervasive as narcotics is to reduce the demand. And education is the only way to do that.
The president says he will support modest spending increases for drug interdiction and for law enforcement. But it's clear the bully pulpit approach to drugs is the cornerstone of the new war on drugs.
My point is, we are not going to solve the problem of drug use in this country through interdiction alone, through cutting off the supply alone.
By spending any more money on drug education, the president will be reversing the policies of his old boss, Ronald Reagan. But the question is still whether slight spending increases represent a war on drugs, and whether the president has already overpromised what he's capable of delivering. Wyatt Andrews, CBS News, the White House.
As the Bushes were settling in at the White House, some real newcomers were arriving at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. From a Washington notebook tonight, a report on the newest of the new in the U.S. Senate, Conrad Burns of Montana, new in town and proud to be there.
So help you God?
I do.
Congratulations.
A rite of passage for the new senators in Washington. For Conrad Burns, the Capitol Dome was a big change from the big skies of Montana.
I just stand at awe, and I don't think I'll ever lose that.
First day on the job, and it's the senator himself who shows up before sunup to turn on the lights and check the calling cards.
Those that you want to continue to know, those you want to forget, and those you want to write thank you notes to.
The door is hardly open for business before the private interest groups come in to give their pitch. This group, a mining delegation.
Sit down, gentlemen, sit down.
Burns is a man at ease with himself. He's a former livestock auctioneer, a farm news broadcaster, 2 years on the Yellowstone County Commission.
We want to talk to you a little bit about some concerns we have with respect to the mining law.
Burns listens but makes no promises.
You just take it one step at a time and go very slow.
But the first week goes by at a trot, meeting the old hands at the confirmation hearing for Commerce Secretary Robert Mossbacher, making sure the nameplate is in order.
Let me, at the first meeting we've had, welcome our distinguished friend, Montana Senator Burns.
Learning quickly that senators have their own elevator and their own underground railway to the Capitol. A big moment for Burns when he stood to introduce his first piece of legislation, a tribute to his home state.
From the eastern prairies to the rugged beauty of the Rockies to the west, Montana truly is a land of the big sky. I rise today to introduce legislation to designate November the 9th, 1989 as Montana's Centennial Day.
Burns is doing this first week what he promised the voters of Montana, preserve and protect the interest of his state.
We know we went through a terrible drought this last year and the year before in our state. We know the importance of water in Montana.
The whole basis to this republic of 50 states is that we don't erode the states' rights to run their own business.
By week's end, he was still on the run, heading back to Montana to tell the folks back home what he thinks of this place where they've sent him.
I really like this job, and I like the work that I'm doing, knowing that there's a task ahead, and just keep asking for their support.
It's a big, big jump, but he understands his state. He knows what he wants to do for Montana. He'll be working. I think everybody's going to like Conrad Burns. How could you dislike Conrad Burns?
NASA today delayed once again the rollout of Space Shuttle Discovery. The problem this time, a tear in the electrical insulation. Rollout now set for next Thursday, 4 days behind schedule. Launch is expected for late February. This is the third anniversary of the Challenger disaster. Flags flew at half-staff at the Kennedy Space Center today in honor of the 7 astronauts who were killed when the space shuttle blew up on January 28, 1986. The future of the U.S. space program is affected by its past and in particular by what happened to Challenger, and Bruce Morton has a report.
3 years after the Challenger explosion, NASA's scientists are still playing catch-up. This is the $1.4 billion Hubble Space Telescope, years in the making, a revolutionary instrument. But it now sits expensively on the ground, stored in a space environment, because it was designed to be launched only from a shuttle. And the earliest that will now happen is December of this year. Galileo is a satellite designed to explore Jupiter and sample its atmosphere. Again, delays in the shuttle program have delayed its launch and forced a change in its orbit.
Galileo no longer goes straight to Jupiter. It has to take a side trip by Venus and a side trip by the Earth.
Magellan is a mission aimed at radar mapping the surface of the planet Venus. It should have flown in 1986, but again, it's been delayed. And if it misses a 20-day launch window this coming April, scientists will have to wait 2 more years before they can try again. Over-reliance on the shuttle as a launch vehicle was a mistake.
What we emphasized before, and incorrectly, was the need to launch everything on the shuttle.
This is a picture of a project NASA wants to build, a probe which would study comets and asteroids. Interestingly, it would be launched by a Titan rocket, not the shuttle. And some argue, why men in space at all?
As far as I'm concerned, there's no scientific reason for people in space. If you want to explore another world, send robots. You can send them to much more dangerous places, and they are less likely to talk back.
Case in point, the United States did send an unmanned probe to Mars. It sent back pictures and information.
TTS, Outscan.
And if you want a more current example, consider Voyager 2. This unmanned probe has already flown close by Jupiter and Saturn and Uranus, sending information back.
It has learned more about each of these planets than mankind has learned in all of recorded history up until that point.
And Voyager is headed this summer for a rendezvous with the planet Neptune. It will send pictures home. Sagan thinks the only point of men in space would be as a U.S.-Soviet political gesture announcing the end of the Cold War.
Something forward-looking, something that can capture the imagination of people all over the world.
NASA says man will continue to play a role in Earth orbit flights, working toward a space station. Deep space, to the planets and beyond, belongs to the machines. 4 of them, 2 Pioneers and 2 Voyagers, will journey out of the solar system toward beyond. Bruce Morton, CBS News, Washington.
The brutal cold wave in Alaska rolled on today. A phenomenon known as ice fog plagued motorists on this day when the official low reading was 69 degrees below zero and the UN official low was minus 86, a record for the day. Alaska's governor declared a state of emergency. The controversy over U.S. livestock treated with hormones has taken a new turn. A Texas official is now proposing that his state lose the hormones and win acceptance in Europe. James Sartori with that.
To most American cattlemen, the European community's ban on hormone-treated beef amounts to a slap in the face.
That's a trumped-up excuse for banning American beef. I think it's a bunch of baloney, yeah.
But Texas's maverick agriculture commissioner wants his state's ranchers to turn the other cheek and give the Europeans what they want, hormone-free beef.
Let's stop quibbling over scientific data. Let's stop playing politics. And let's start making deals.
And Hightower's proposal hasn't fallen on deaf ears in Texas.
And we feel like that our guidance or our game plan or our rule book is written by the consumer. That is, the people that purchase our product.
The Europeans are delighted with Hightower's proposal.
It's no bad thing to give a helping hand to a Texan. I'm sure you would agree.
But the proposal has generated a firestorm among a lot of beef producers.
He is undermining the efforts of the administration. And long term, we all pay for that.
Perhaps a more serious problem is that all beef for export must be federally inspected. But the U.S. Department of Agriculture says it cannot guarantee to the Europeans that any beef is free from hormones. So Texas may now go it alone and negotiate its own certification directly with the Europeans.
We've got the guts to go to Europe.
But without proper certification and prices high enough to justify Texas ranchers' interest, hormone-free beef could be just a bum steer. James Hattori, CBS News, Garfield, Texas.
Opera is is suddenly turning up in the place where you least expect it, television commercials. Richard Roth reports.
An opera composer once bragged he could put a laundry list to music. 100 years later, Madison Avenue did it with a laundry detergent. And advertising experts say it's the sound of something new, part of a trend. It's not just Mahler in the background of the latest rent-a-car commercial. It's highbrow music almost everywhere, and especially it's opera.
Master locks are tough under fire.
It almost tries to give some of these products a sense of eternity. It's a little hipper to use opera than to use rock and roll.
Hipper and cheaper. Using opera means you don't have to pay for the production of an expensive original jingle. And while it cost Pepsi a reported $15 million for Michael Jackson's music, the folks who make Gallo wine didn't have to pay Giacomo Puccini a penny for the words and music to Mio Babbino Caro, a song that's 70 years old. What's more, advertisers say this kind of music carries a special message. Unlike the words, perhaps, the idea is supposed to be something anyone can understand.
If the monkey is so moved, then anybody could be moved, really. And classical music kind of telegraphs a lot of things. It telegraphs upscale, upmarket, affluent people that have taste and discernment and things like that.
But the fact is, like a lot of new trends in advertising, this one has been around before. It was 20 years ago that Kellogg's rewrote the lyrics to Leon Cavallo's Pagliacci. The news today, of course, is that now opera isn't just for breakfast anymore.
It's my mother-in-law.
Richard Roth, CBS News, New York.
That's the news. Susan Spencer will be here tomorrow. Coming up later tonight, West 57th, and first thing in the morning, Charles Kuralt celebrates 10 years of Sunday morning. I'm Bob Schieffer, CBS News in New York. Good night.
This is CBS.
Just ahead on 11 News, bulldozers move in behind police.